Let's be honest for a second. Most people think manipulation is obvious, loud, aggressive, easy to spot. Someone pushing you, pressuring you, clearly trying to get something. But the most powerful manipulation? You don't see it coming. You don't even feel it happening. Invisible manipulation works quietly. It slips into conversations, relationships, workplaces, social media, and even your own thoughts. And the scary part? It often feels normal. One of the most common techniques is framing. This is when someone controls how a situation is presented so you naturally reach the conclusion they want. They don't tell you what to think, they just guide the options. Ever heard someone say, "Don't you think this is the only reasonable choice?" That's framing. Suddenly, disagreeing feels wrong, even if you had doubts a moment ago. Another subtle method is emotional triggering. Instead of using logic, manipulators push emotional buttons: guilt, fear, pride, or insecurity. For example, "After everything I've done for you, now the discussion isn't about facts anymore. It's about emotions." And once emotions take over, critical thinking usually steps back. Then there's social proof, a favorite in both marketing and everyday life. When someone says, "Everyone agrees with this," or "most people are doing it," your brain wants to follow the crowd. Humans are wired for belonging. Manipulators know this and use it to make their ideas feel safer, smarter, or more popular than they really are. A particularly sneaky technique is slow normalization. Instead of pushing a big demand all at once, the manipulator introduces small steps over time. Each step feels harmless. But one day, you look back and realize your boundaries have completely shifted, and you're not sure how it happened. Gaslighting deserves a mention too. This is when someone subtly questions your memory, perception, or judgment. Phrases like, "You're overreacting," "That never happened," or "You're too sensitive," slowly make you doubt yourself. The goal isn't to win an argument, it's to make you stop trusting your own mind. What makes these techniques so effective is that they rarely look evil. They often come wrapped in charm, confidence, or concern. The manipulator may even believe they're right. That's why invisible manipulation is everywhere, in friendships, romantic relationships, workplaces, and online spaces. So what's the defense? Awareness. Once you recognize these patterns, they lose a lot of their power. You start pausing instead of reacting. You question pressure that feels emotional rather than logical. You notice when your boundaries are being slowly moved. Invisible manipulation thrives in silence and autopilot mode. The moment you slow down and ask, "Why do I feel pushed right now?" the spell begins to break. And that's the real power, not controlling others, but staying conscious enough that no one controls you without your permission. Here's an uncomfortable truth most people don't like to admit: you are being influenced every single day, and most of the time, you don't realize it. Manipulation doesn't always come as force. It doesn't shout. It whispers. It blends into normal conversations, friendly advice, good intentions, and casual opinions. That's why it works so well. Invisible manipulation is powerful precisely because it feels natural. It feels like your own idea. One of the strongest tools manipulators use is authority illusion. When someone speaks confidently, uses complex language, or presents themselves as an expert, we tend to stop questioning them. Even when their logic is weak, confidence creates credibility. Your brain assumes, they sound sure, so they must be right. This is why titles, uniforms, and expert opinions can override your own judgment. Another quiet technique is scarcity pressure. When something feels limited, time, opportunity, attention, your rational mind panics. Statements like, "This is your last chance," or "You'll regret it if you don't act now," shut down careful thinking. You're pushed into quick decisions, which is exactly where manipulation thrives. Then there's mirroring, a method that builds false trust. The manipulator subtly copies your tone, body language, values, or opinions. This creates an unconscious sense of connection. You feel understood. You feel safe. And once trust is there, influence becomes easy. You listen more. You resist less. A very underestimated tactic is information overload. Instead of hiding information, manipulators flood you with it. Too many details, too many statistics, too many explanations. Your brain gets tired. And when mental fatigue hits, people tend to agree just to end the discomfort. Confusion becomes a shortcut to control. Let's talk about false choices. This is when someone gives you options, but all of them benefit them. Do you want to do it now or later? Notice what's missing. The option to say no. You feel free, but the path is already chosen for you. Another deeply manipulative strategy is identity manipulation. The person ties a behavior or decision to who you are as a person. You're not the type of person who gives up, right? Now saying no doesn't feel like a choice, it feels like a threat to your identity. And humans will protect their identity at almost any cost. Over time, these techniques wear people down through emotional exhaustion. Constant small pressures, subtle criticisms, shifting expectations. You don't collapse, you adapt. And adaptation is where control settles in. You start pleasing. You start avoiding conflict. You start doubting your instincts. Social media has turned invisible manipulation into a daily habit. Algorithms show you what keeps you emotional, reactive, and engaged. Outrage spreads faster than calm thinking. Validation becomes currency. Comparison becomes normal. And slowly, without noticing, your beliefs, moods, and attention are shaped for you. The most dangerous part? Many manipulators don't see themselves as manipulators. They believe they're helping, leading, protecting, or just being honest. Intent doesn't erase impact. So how do you protect yourself? You slow down, you get comfortable with silence, you stop explaining yourself too much, you question urgency, you listen to discomfort instead of ignoring it. Manipulation loses its grip when you stop reacting automatically. When you pause and ask, is this really my choice, or am I being guided? Clarity returns. Freedom isn't about controlling others. It's about noticing when someone is trying to control you. And choosing not to play along. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. Most manipulation doesn't feel like manipulation at all. That's the trick. If it felt aggressive, you'd resist. If it felt obvious, you'd question it. So instead, it feels reasonable. Friendly. Logical. Sometimes even loving. That's why people stay in toxic relationships for years. That's why employees accept unfair treatment. That's why crowds believe things they would never accept alone. One powerful technique is timing control. Manipulators don't push when you're strong, they wait until you're tired, stressed, lonely, or overwhelmed. Late at night. After a long day. During emotional moments. When your mental defenses are low, even small suggestions slide straight in. Another method is selective honesty. This one is dangerous because it mixes truth with distortion. The manipulator tells you some real facts, just not all of them. Because when people catch a lie, trust breaks. But when they catch partial truth, trust grows. You think, they're being honest with me. And that makes the hidden parts even harder to notice. Then there's repetition, the quiet brain hacker. The human mind starts accepting ideas simply because it hears them often. Not because they're true, but because they're familiar. This is why slogans work. Why rumors spread. Why a lie repeated enough times starts sounding like common sense. A subtle but powerful move is withholding attention, approval, affection, information. Nothing is said directly. No argument. No demand. Just absence. And humans hate emotional gaps. So they fill them, by trying harder, agreeing more, shrinking themselves. Control without words. Another invisible weapon is moral superiority. The manipulator positions themselves as more ethical, more mature, more right. I'm just being honest. I care too much to stay silent. Disagreeing now feels immoral. You're not just wrong, you're a bad person. This shuts down conversation instantly. Let's talk about role assignment. Manipulators often give you a role without asking, the responsible one, the emotional one, the difficult one, the fixer, the problem. Once you accept the role, you start behaving according to it. And they never have to force you, you regulate yourself. One of the most effective long-term strategies is confusion. Mixed signals. Changing rules. Inconsistent reactions. One day you're praised, the next day criticized for the same behavior. Your brain starts chasing stability instead of truth. And the person who controls the chaos becomes the center of gravity. This is how people slowly lose their inner compass, not in one dramatic moment, but in tiny adjustments. You stop trusting your gut, you start asking for permission, even internally. You rehearse conversations in your head, you over-explain, you apologize too fast, and you don't even realize when it started. Invisible manipulation doesn't want your obedience, it wants your self-doubt. Because once you doubt yourself, guidance feels like help. Direction feels like relief. And control feels like safety. The escape isn't loud or dramatic either, that it's quiet, that it's noticing tension in your body during a normal conversation, that it's questioning why urgency always benefits the same person, that it's realizing that peace shouldn't require self-erasure, that it's understanding that clarity feels calm, not pressured. The moment you stop explaining your boundaries, manipulation weakens. The moment you allow silence, it panics. The moment you trust your perception again, the system cracks. And here's the most important part. Awareness doesn't make you paranoid, that it makes you free, because once you can see invisible strings, you stop dancing for them, that at some point, manipulation stops being about getting you to do something, that it becomes about shaping who you are allowed to be. The most dangerous manipulators don't demand. They adjust, they don't say, change. They say, I just thought you were different. And just like that, doubt enters. Point one of the quietest techniques is expectation shifting. What was once optional slowly becomes required. What was once appreciated becomes expected. You're never told the rules changed, you just feel the pressure to keep up. And when you fail, the disappointment feels personal, even though the standard was never agreed on. Then there's emotional bookkeeping. The manipulator keeps a mental record of everything they've done for you, and brings it out only when needed. Not as a request, but as a reminder, I've always been there for you. Now your autonomy feels like betrayal. Another powerful strategy is false vulnerability. They share something emotional, not to connect, but to disarm. Once you open up in return, your weaknesses become reference points. Later, those same insecurities are used subtly, never directly, but always effectively. A deeply destabilizing method is contrast control. The manipulator creates emotional highs and lows on purpose. Warmth, then distance. Praise, then coldness. Over time, your nervous system becomes focused on regaining the good version of them. You stop asking whether the behavior is healthy, you just want the calm back. This is where trauma bonding begins. Not through pain alone, but through relief. The relief feels earned. And anything that feels earned feels valuable. Another invisible move is language hijacking. Words get redefined. Respect becomes obedience, sensitivity becomes weakness, boundaries become selfishness, love becomes endurance. Once language shifts, reality follows. Manipulators also use projection masterfully. They accuse you of the very behaviors they display. Control becomes concern. Jealousy becomes care. Aggression becomes passion. And because you're constantly defending yourself, you never get to examine them. Over time, this creates internal surveillance. Even when the manipulator isn't present, their voice is. You edit yourself. You predict reactions. You abandon thoughts before they fully form. Control no longer needs effort, it's been installed. And here's the cruelest part, from the outside, everything looks fine, that you're functioning. Smiling. Managing, but inside, something is quieter than it used to be, your spontaneity, your certainty, your sense of, I want. Invisible manipulation doesn't break you loudly, that it makes you smaller without asking. The way out doesn't start with confrontation. It starts with reclaiming language. You stop saying, I'm too much. You start saying, this doesn't feel right. You stop asking, am I wrong? You start asking, what do I need? You allow discomfort instead of avoiding it. You let people misunderstand you. You accept that clarity may cost you connection. And that's when the dynamic shifts, because manipulation depends on your silence, your politeness, your self-doubt. The moment you choose honesty over harmony, the invisible becomes visible. And once it's visible, it loses its magic. There's a specific moment when manipulation begins to fail. It's not dramatic. There's no argument. No sudden escape. It's just a thought that doesn't go away. Why do I feel tense right now? That single question is dangerous, not for you, but for the system that's been controlling you, because manipulation survives on speed. Quick reactions. Automatic responses. Emotional reflexes. The moment you slow down, it starts to crack. One of the first signs of waking up is emotional desynchronization. You notice that your feelings no longer match the situation you're in. You're apologizing without knowing why. You feel guilty without doing anything wrong. Your body reacts before your mind can explain it. That's not weakness. That's awareness knocking. Another realization hits quietly. Your confusion isn't random. It has a pattern. The same conversations leave you drained. The same person benefits from your self-doubt. The same topics are never allowed to be questioned. Once you see the pattern, the fog loses its mystery. Manipulators often rely on fear of loss to keep control. Fear of losing love, approval, stability, identity. But as awareness grows, a new fear appears, a healthier one. What am I losing by staying? That question changes everything. You begin to notice how often your needs are postponed. How often your discomfort is minimized. How often peace is promised but never delivered. And suddenly, endurance stops looking like strength. Another critical shift is detachment from outcome. You stop trying to manage reactions. You allow silence to exist. You don't rush to fix tension. This is deeply unsettling for manipulators, because they depend on your emotional labor. You also start recognizing clean communication versus pressure. Clean communication feels calm, even when it's firm. Pressure feels urgent, emotional, and confusing. Once you learn the difference, your body relaxes around clarity, and tightens around control. Here's something rarely talked about. Manipulation often collapses when you stop explaining yourself. No long justifications. No emotional essays. No defending your boundaries. Just, I'm not comfortable with that. That sentence is terrifying to someone who needs access to your inner world. As awareness deepens, you reclaim choice. Not rebellion. Not aggression. Choice. You choose when to engage. You choose what deserves your energy. You choose not to attend every emotional emergency. And slowly, something returns, your sense of time, your curiosity, your humor. Your ability to want things again. Invisible manipulation thrives in urgency and emotional fog. Clarity feels boring to it. Predictable. Uncontrollable. That's why manipulators often escalate when they feel control slipping. More guilt. More intensity. More misunderstandings. This isn't a sign you're wrong. It's a sign the dynamic is changing. And then comes the final realization, the most uncomfortable one. You were never weak, you were just empathetic in a system that exploited empathy. The goal isn't to harden yourself. It's to protect your awareness, because once you're awake, manipulation can knock. But it can't move in. There comes a point when manipulation no longer feels confusing. It feels predictable. You start noticing the script before it's fully spoken. The guilt appears right on time. The urgency arrives exactly when you hesitate. The disappointment shows up the moment you assert yourself. And that's when you realize something important. This was never a misunderstanding. It was a pattern. Manipulation loses its power the moment it becomes boring. Repetitive. Transparent. Once you can anticipate the emotional moves, they stop feeling personal. You're no longer inside the game, you're watching it. One of the final tools manipulators rely on is emotional escalation. When subtle control stops working, intensity increases. Louder emotions. Bigger reactions. Dramatic conclusions. This isn't strength, it's desperation. C. Here's something rarely talked about. Manipulation often collapses when you stop explaining yourself. No long justifications. No emotional essays. No defending your boundaries. Just, I'm not comfortable with that. that sentence is terrifying to someone who needs access to your inner world. As awareness deepens, you reclaim choice. Not rebellion. Not aggression. Choice. You choose when to engage. You choose what deserves your energy. You choose not to attend every emotional emergency. And slowly, something returns: your sense of time, your curiosity, your humor. Your ability to want things again. Invisible manipulation thrives in urgency and emotional fog. Clarity feels boring to it. Predictable. Uncontrollable. That's why manipulators often escalate when they feel control slipping. More guilt. More intensity. More misunderstandings. This isn't a sign you're wrong, that it's a sign the dynamic is changing. And then comes the final realization, the most uncomfortable one. You were never weak, you were just empathetic in a system that exploited empathy. The goal isn't to harden yourself, that it's to protect your awareness, because once you're awake, manipulation can knock. But it can't move in. There comes a point when manipulation no longer feels confusing, that it feels predictable. You start noticing the script before it's fully spoken. The guilt appears right on time. The urgency arrives exactly when you hesitate. The disappointment shows up the moment you assert yourself. And that's when you realize something important. This was never a misunderstanding, that it was a pattern. Manipulation loses its power the moment it becomes boring, repetitive, transparent. Once you can anticipate the emotional moves, they stop feeling personal. You're no longer inside the game, you're watching it. One of the final tools manipulators rely on is emotional escalation. When subtle control stops working, intensity increases. Louder emotions. Bigger reactions. Dramatic conclusions. This isn't strength, it's desperation. See. You may hear things like, "You've changed. You're cold now. I don't recognize you anymore." And in a way, they're right. You've stopped bleeding openly. You've stopped negotiating your worth. You've stopped translating your needs into something acceptable. Another common move is rewriting history. Suddenly, they were always supportive. Always fair. Always misunderstood. This isn't about truth, it's about reclaiming narrative control. But now, your memory feels clearer. Your body remembers what your mind once questioned. And you trust it. This is when emotional independence quietly forms. You stop needing agreement to feel certain. You stop waiting for permission to feel hurt. You stop looking for validation from the same place that caused the damage. Silence becomes comfortable again. Your thoughts feel like your own. Your reactions slow down. And something surprising happens. Your energy returns. Not explosive. Not dramatic. Just steady. You no longer feel the need to prove, explain, or convince. You understand that people who benefit from your self-doubt will never fully understand your clarity, and that's okay. Here's the truth most people never say out loud. Manipulation doesn't end because the manipulator changes. It ends because you do. Because you stop participating. Because you stop shrinking. Because you stop mistaking pressure for love. The final step isn't confrontation. It's alignment. Your thoughts match your actions. Your boundaries match your values. Your no doesn't come with guilt attached. And that's when control fully disappears. Invisible manipulation cannot survive in a mind that is calm, present, and self-trusting. It needs chaos. It needs emotional fog. It needs you to doubt what you feel. Once you don't, it has nowhere to stand. You don't become harder. You become clearer. And clarity is untouchable. At the end of manipulation, there is no explosion. No victory speech. No dramatic goodbye. There is calm, the kind of calm that comes when your thoughts stop arguing with each other. When your body no longer braces for impact during normal conversations. When silence feels safe again, you don't feel the need to explain yourself, you don't rush to fix discomfort, you don't chase clarity from people who thrive on confusion, and that's when you realize, control didn't disappear. You stepped out of its reach. Manipulation only works when you doubt what you feel, when you fear what you might lose, when you believe peace must be earned through endurance. The moment you stop sacrificing yourself for stability, the illusion collapses. You understand now that love doesn't require pressure. That respect doesn't need urgency, that truth doesn't demand exhaustion. You stop performing understanding, you stop shrinking your instincts, you stop calling survival strength. And something returns, quietly, naturally, your voice. Your boundaries, your sense of self. You no longer ask, am I allowed to feel this? You no longer wonder, what will this cost me? Because freedom doesn't feel loud. It feels clear. Invisible manipulation feeds on silence, speed, and self-doubt. But clarity is slow. Grounded. Unimpressed, and once clarity becomes your default, nothing hidden can hold power over you again, not guilt. Not fear, not control dressed as care. You don't need to fight, you don't need to prove, you simply see. And that is the moment manipulation ends, not because it was defeated, but because it was finally understood.